So I first met Jim back at a table at CTN Expo about I don't know how many years ago, and you were selling DVD copies of your short film Leonardo, and I of course bought one, and I've been showing it to my students ever since.
Aw.
Anyway, we talked a bit because you were just kind of trapped there, so so I just kind of kept coming up to you and bugging you and talking about, oh, you work at Pixar, really? Well, yeah. Well, how's that? How's that going? Ah, it's work. I'm just working on it. I'm like, work. Ah.
I
You
hope I
did say
sounded better than
something.
that.
I was working on a project, and you were saying how Leonardo took you how long to make? I mean,
It took me ten years to
10 years.
make.
Okay, but you were kind of busy with other things like working at some place called Pixar and working on a bunch of
Yes.
well-known films. So you kind of had to do it over time. But you did tell me once. You said, a project is like a shark. It always must be moving forward to keep it alive. I
Yes.
remember you said that, and I was like, yeah, that's right. Because it starts to
Well,
slow
that's pretty
down
good.
and it starts to die, and then you got to like work on it some more and do that.
Hmm.
So today we're speaking to Jim Capobianco about his film festival. But you've also done, like I said, you've done a lot of work for Pixar and other places.
Hmm.
If you check out his IMDb profile, there's a whole bunch of information there. Now, did you work on something called Tasmania? Did you
Wow.
did you work
You're
on that?
digging deep, man.
Yeah, I worked
Whoa.
digging deep. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Now we'll hear the dirt. Yes.
oh, you're like pulling up the rocks. It was the first job I had actually out of college. And I was desperately looking for something. And what I really wanted to do was get into storyboarding.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of friends who had landed at Warner Brothers, and they were on Tasmania or doing other stuff there. They were said they were looking for, they needed character layout artists, doing TV animation basically. And so I just submitted and got in there doing that. So I was doing character layout, so I would draw the characters and the whole little scene. And it was funny though, because I got brought in, and I started for like a month, and then they pulled me into the office and they said, actually we made a mistake. And
Oh
I'm like,
no.
What? You're actually you see, we hired someone else before you,
Oh no.
but they had a trouble with their green card,
Oh.
and you're actually taking her seat,
Okay.
her spot." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Well, they had promised me, oh, it's at least 6 months worth of work or something." And I had only been there like a couple of weeks at this point, and they're like, "Well, we promised you so you could stay another couple of weeks." So
That's
I was
nice.
like, "Okay, all right. I don't really want to do this job anyway," as I really wanted to storyboard. I didn't want
Right.
to do that. And I was actually trying to take a storyboard test there and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But anyway, after that month or so, I had to leave because this Canadian woman animator came in who they had hired
Ah.
instead of me.
Wow.
And I have no problem with that, except that it would have been cool if they, kind of
Yeah.
told me ahead of time or
Right.
figured out. I don't know.
Oh.
So anyway,
So.
that led to getting hired at Disney though, because then
Yeah.
I just reworked my portfolio because I had no job again, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be tougher than I thought,
Yeah.
getting out of school and trying to find work. And this was a time, it wasn't like today where, I mean,
Yeah.
I think they're pulling kids out of school left and right probably to bring them
Mm-hmm.
onto shows and stuff. There's so much work out there today.
Mm-hmm.
Back then it was like a handful of TV shows, and you
Right.
had Disney, Don Bluth's studio still
Mm-hmm.
around, and that's it.
Sorry, was
So yeah, I
going.
worked at Disney for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I got hired on. I always tell my students I teach, it's like it's about who you know, timing, and then talent.
Yeah.
And so a couple of my other friends from school, from Cal Arts, started as animators. They're actually the Bancroft brothers.
Hmm.
They were working at Disney at the time, and they said, I was trying to get into the story department, and so they connected me with Ed Gombert, the really talented, fantastic story guy, Ed Gombert, and said, maybe he could look at your portfolio and just give you some input. And so I showed Ed my work, and he gave me some tips, and I went back and reworked it, and then my portfolio, and then brought it back to him, and then submitted it. And I lucked out in the sense of they were gearing up Lion King and Pocahontas at the same time,
Mm.
and they needed board artists. So they started a training program. They brought me in at the same time as Rob Gibbs, my classmate from college. So we both started at Disney at the same time, and I landed right in like first in development there to train with Hendel Butoy, and worked on Fantasia Continued or 2000. Or I started working on with him, and then on this sequence that didn't end up in the final film. And then the Lion King. Then they were like this, like picking people to help out on the Lion King or Pocahontas. And at the time, Pocahontas was the film everybody wanted to be on
Hmm.
because it was really designy and exciting. At the time, I think all the animals were talking animals, and
Mm.
it was being directed by Mike Gabriel and Mike Giamo, and Mike Giamo was maybe um, production designing, and Mike was my teacher at school, and so it was really everybody. It was like clamoring to get on a Pocahontas,
Mm-hmm.
and Lion King at the time, which was called King of the Jungle, nobody wanted to go on because it was a troubled project, and they
Ah.
had just changed the directors out and all this stuff, and so I was like, and so then I got assigned to Lion King, and Rob went to Pocahontas, and I was like, oh, Rob, got to go to Pocahontas. And I ended up going to Lion King, and but I got assigned to my mentor Bernie Mattinson,
Mm.
uh, which was fantastic. So Bernie is like goes back to Sleeping Beauty days, old time, back to
Mm-hmm.
that connection of the old Nine Old Men days,
Mm.
and he's a story artist and animator, story artist, and then eventually I think he co-directed The Great Mouse Detective, or directed that, and the Christmas Carol, was involved in that too. And anyway, he was just ultimate in like my Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was so fantastic. And we would talk movies, and he gave me the best bit of advice because I came in with they gave me this assignment, which was the scene where Simba and is being reprimanded by his dad for going to the graveyard,
Mm.
and they gave me this little paragraph, and it just said what they wanted, like what the sequence was, and it was just a paragraph. It wasn't a script page or anything, and they just said it was kind of like a courtship of Eddie's father moment,
No.
and this is
Wow.
really dating.
Yeah.
And the end of the show would always end with Eddie's father um,
Mm-hmm.
answering some question from Eddie, who would ask something about life, or I guess something they dealt with in the episode, or something
Mm-hmm.
like, Dad, where do we go when we die, or
Yeah.
why is the sky blue,
Yeah. Yeah.
something, and then the dad would give him some life lesson.
Right.
So that's what they basically said in this paragraph, and it was nothing really to go on. So I was like panicking, and I'm young story trainee artist, and run into Bernie's room, and I go, Bernie, what am I gonna do with this? I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. And he's just like, Jim, calm down, calm down. Start with what you know.
Mm.
And that is like, I've hung on to that forever now, and I always tell my students that. So he's like, just start, list what you know about the sequence, what went on before, when it goes after, who the characters are. There's always something you can build on. There's always something that about the project, that or the situation, or the characters, or so at that point in the story, they had already developed the ghost scene later on in the movie. They already
Mm.
had that, where Simba's dad, where Mufasa comes to him as a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, and I knew too that this was the last time he was going to see his dad. The next sequence was the stampede. So I'm like, oh, all right. So So then I start to build it from there, and I came up with the concept of the kings in the past being up in the stars, because I knew that would tie to later when he's like watching, his dad comes down from the sky basically as a
Yeah.
ghost. So I tried to tie it into that later sequence, wrote out a whole thing with that, and then pitched it to Rob Minkoff and Roger Allers, and I pitched it to those guys, and Roger Allers like loved it. He thought he's like, Jim nailed it. This is perfect. This is exactly what we need in this scene. And Rob was a little bit like, I don't know, maybe. And Roger's like, what are you talking about? It's great. He's like, okay, it's good. So then they gave it. Then I worked with the writers, Irene Mecki and Jonathan Roberts, and we developed the scene even further, like and scripted and stuff. And I storyboarded it. So that was the first sequence. So I always owe Bernie that. He was just fantastic as a person to, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and he's one of my giants. So so I was at Disney for 5 years. So I was on Lion King. Also, Brenda Chapman was my head of story. That was my first head of story, and she's to this day we're good friends. And then from there, I went to back into development, worked on some more Fantasia, and then went on to Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then went back into development, worked on some more Fantasia, storyboarded the Tin Soldier sequence for the Fantasia. And then I went on to Dinosaur, and at that time my contract was coming due, and Joe Ranft, who was my story teacher, another giant I adore, he was my story teacher at Cal Arts. I was in his first story class.
Wow.
Me and Pete Docter, Ash Brannon, Pete Docter, we were a part of Joe's first story class ever. He had seen my boards on the Tin Soldier sequence, and he stopped me at the Pocahontas rap party, and he said, yeah, your stuff's getting really great and stuff. So if you want to, if you're ever thinking of coming to Pixar, maybe you should, think about it. So like the next Monday I called him. I'm like, hey, I want to go to
Thought
Pixar.
about it.
I think at that time too they hadn't released Toy Story yet, but the shorts, and I knew they were making Toy Story, and we saw some bits of it around the studio a little bit because they would come down to pitch it. And it just seemed, I knew my contract was coming up, and I also was not excited about Dinosaur. So I'm sorry, all the fans of Dinosaur out there.
That was Disney's, wasn't that the first like CG movie or something like that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so but then I still had a year left, so he was like, "Oh, I can't poach you, but when the year's up, give me a call." So my year was coming due. When my year was coming due, I called him, and I kid you not, this is how he reacted. He goes, "What? I can't believe you called me! No way! What? I'm flying you up here next week."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Okay, great." So what turned out, they were on Bug's Life. So at this point, they had Toy Story had come out, and they were making Bug's Life, and they were in a story crunch. And some of your listeners may know of Jorn Klubian, who is a storyboard artist, animator, and a Danish rock star. So, and Jorn was like a really interesting, wonderful guy, where he would loves animation, loves Bill Pete, storyboarding and stuff, and he would float into animation and do some animation for all story work. I had worked with him on Lion King too. Suddenly he'd have to go back to Denmark and be a rock star again. So I think what happened was he came into Joe's office and was like, "Joe, I need to be a rock star," and had to go. And so he left Joe, and and they were in this story crunch. So they flew me up next week. I met with Joe and Andrew Stanton, and Andrew hired me on the spot, and then I started like in that following February. And I was the first, I don't know, I was like the 10th storyboard artist they had hired, and I was the first out of Disney. Before that, only Joe had come from Disney.
Right.
And I had this great little core team on Bugs Life. And so yeah, Bugs Life was my first story work at Pixar, and then I was there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
From that time on.
And like I said, you were working on your own your own thing called Leonardo,
Yeah.
which you finally
So
got
I
that
had
done.
started that right before I moved to Pixar. Yeah, I
Oh,
had
okay.
started working on it. I wanted to do a short film.
Yeah.
So I started developing it, and so when I got into Pixar, I carved it out, and then which is basically means it's like you list the projects you're kind of working on your own, so that they can't claim
Right.
ownership to
Right.
it, because you sign a contract that basically, well, Pixar has no contracts, but it was sort of a written agreement that you wouldn't develop your own stuff. They didn't at the time have contracts. I don't know if maybe they do now. I don't
Mm.
know. Yeah, so I was developing Leonardo at the time. So I just then plugged away at that while I was at Pixar and whenever I could.
Oh, okay. So
Weekends,
now
stuff.
I know that took a while to do, and you were, that took a long time to finish. You finally finished it. But now I noticed I was looking around your Vimeo thing, and I saw you have something called the Inventor. Are you trying to go
Yes.
back and turn this into a 3D film, like a stop motion film,
Yeah.
or what? Because I see lots of stop motion tests and of your
Hmm.
Leonardo character, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
something's going on here.
Yeah. So something's percolating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am I've developed it into a feature length story.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not really it's based on the same character who was sort of developed for that short. My kind of depiction of what like a Leonardo da Vinci character. He is Leonardo da Vinci, but it's like my interpretation of Leonardo da
Right.
Vinci. Yeah, we're making it into a stop motion 2D animated hybrid film. So we'll have a mixture of the two techniques.
Hmm.
And I always could see Leonardo in a three-dimensional world, because I created maquettes for the original
Mm-hmm.
short for the animator. So I kind of visualized him into a three-dimensional character.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time when I was starting to develop the feature, stop motion was kind of on the rise. This was kind of a while ago. I've been working on it quite some time. Kind of, yeah, it was like Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Mm.
There's a bunch of stuff coming from Aardman still. There was like this resurgence, and Leica was, starting and doing stuff. And so it seemed like it's either going to be a CG film or could possibly maybe be a stop motion film. And 2D animation, like Disney was getting rid of 2D, and there's only like a couple places in Europe still doing it, and in Asia. But I was like, okay, well, if I want to sell this as a film, that maybe it's could be a stop motion film, because I couldn't really, because of the subject matter of it being Leonardo da Vinci. CG didn't quite feel right to me. It felt
Mm-hmm.
like it should be a handcrafted animation medium.
Mm-hmm.
So stop motion felt right. Like I felt like there's the mechanics of stop motion and the craft that goes into stop motion that feels like I could see Leonardo da Vinci in that world. And I don't know, also like the idea of seeing a little Renaissance world in models seemed
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah. Right.
cool, right?
Yeah.
uh, so that mixed with 2D, I think would be great. So I started developing it that way, and then stop motion is kind of has its dips, ups and downs, but it's kept alive. So
Mm-hmm.
it feels like we're back into another resurgence of it with Missing Link
Mm-hmm.
getting an Oscar nomination, and this stuff coming out of Europe. There's so much stop motion going on, and Netflix doing a whole bunch of stop motion now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it feels like, maybe we're right. So it's been developing it. I've written the script many times now. It's pretty honed in. We are partnering with a studio in France
Mm.
named Folioscope. And, last year they worked on a film called The Tower. So they're eager to do it, and we're happy to have them as partners. And so we're going to Cartoon Movie in March to pitch it, and that's kind of the independent world of animation route.
Hmm. Okay.
So it's a very low budget. It's not like a Leica budget. It's more in the lower single digit millions.
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, um, but and I've always the story and my like affection, or my sort of uh, feelings towards the story, or
Mm-hmm.
my temperament to it, have always been more of a European feel and a more of an art house kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it has that going for it. And I think the only place it could really get made is in Europe. Though, I mean, we'd be happy to get a US distributor for it, but
Yeah.
we shall see.
Okay.
So anyway, kind of putting the gas pedal down and trying to get it going
Mm-hmm.
now. So a lot of work's been done over the past, because again, it seems like the Leonardo short all over again,
Right.
where I didn't start it like right after the short, but probably like a couple of years after the short. So it's almost been 10 years
Wow. Yeah.
to just get it going.
Right.
So now I feel like we finally might be making it in the next
Oh, okay.
couple of years. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
so what I'm trying to do is start to get the word out there.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to get some momentum
Mm-hmm.
of people following it and seeing what I'd like to. I'm going to try to post more to the Facebook page, more out there. We may do a Kickstarter to like get some development money,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of shore up some of the budget and get people involved and interested in what we're doing, especially like the animation community, if they kind of want to see how these films kind of come together
Mm-hmm.
and track it and follow it. It would be, I think, fun to build that.
I do have to ask you a question. One of my students at CSU Fullerton, Michael Sorensen, asked me to ask you the animation and orchestral nature of this production, which we're going to go into in a little bit, the Philharmonic Fantastique. So they have a lot of similarities with Disney's two Fantasia films. That
Hmm.
being said, so between the two, which Fantasia short is or are your favorites and why?
Well, in the original, I love Dance of the Hours, of course. How
Mm-hmm.
can you not love that sequence with the alligators? And
Oh, yeah.
it's just such great animation. I love that. The Nutcracker sequence is just beautiful. And Night on Bald Mountain,
Oh,
of
yeah.
course. And, Sorcerer's Apprentice. Gotta love it.
Pretty much the whole thing, maybe.
I mean, we were in for the Philharmonia Fantastique. It definitely has a big toe in Fantasia. I think it's hard not to. If
Mm-hmm.
you're doing an orchestral piece that with animation, it's hard not to kind of,
Yeah.
it be evocative of Fantasia. Um, the storyline of it as well is a bit. It has a kind of a storyline to it, but like Fantasia, it's not overtly explained to you and everything. And
Hmm.
the main story of it is basically a journey through the orchestra, and kind of the technology of that orchestra, that the orchestra itself and each instrument is a piece of technology unto itself. So like a violin is a bit of technology, maybe not computer technology, but it's of the time a very advanced technology to create a violin. So that, and then combined as an orchestra, the orchestra itself is sort of a working mechanism in a sense. So that's Mason Bates, who's the composer. That's kind of his, um, you know, that's where he comes from when he approaches his music. Is very much that aspect and very much the thing he's interested in. And he wanted to create a new piece that was like an introduction to the orchestra for families and young people, that they would get excited about different instruments, the orchestra itself, symphonies, that whole world, so that it can kind of bring in new people to the symphony, so that they can experience this wonderful art form. So it's an animated piece that plays with a live symphony orchestra accompaniment.
So you created the character, and kind of Gary
Yeah.
Rystrom came up with the story, or you both kind of did that,
Well,
or?
we all did.
Yeah.
The three of us. Gary Rydstrom directed it. I'm titled as the animation director, and then Mason is a composer.
Mm-hmm.
But we all three would meet. Mason came up with the initial idea for it and has been kind of the driving force of it. Gary is overseeing kind of the entire kind of construction of it, and also adding sound to it
Mm-hmm.
where needed to sweeten things and to kind of add like a different dimension to sound, because we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to depict things like what it sounds like inside of a cello. Like if you go inside the cello, what would that actually be more like? So, this amazing Oscar-winning, many-time nominated sound designer
Yeah.
directing the film, he is adding his expertise to it. So we're all bringing our talents to it. And then the three of us sort of banged out the story and shaped it into what it is today. So
Oh, okay, great. Well, so we'll
yeah.
have to wait until it comes to a symphony near us to see this, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that I think is the ideal way
Yeah.
to see it, but then it'll also hopefully get distribution and will,
Right.
be other ways to see it eventually. We hope it'll go to schools and
Yeah.
people could use it for music education
Mm-hmm.
and everything and stuff.
Great.
So yeah, it's been
Mm-hmm.
great. A really tiny team of animators. Some of the animators I worked with on Mary Poppins, we brought on. There is a bit of a combination of live action with animation in it.
Mm.
So a lot of the lessons I learned on Mary Poppins, I applied to this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's just a fun piece. I feel like we captured something kind of unique and different. So
Yeah.
excited about it.
You have your own like studio.
Aerial Contrivance Workshop.
Yes. I saw the thing with the Apollo
Oh yeah.
stop motion, or I think it's stop motion. I don't know.
Well, it's actually it's CG. It looks
CG.
like stop motion, but it's
Yeah.
that was fun. And then the little Apollo thing kind of grew out of that Galileo thing
Mhm.
because that was an experiment done by Dave Smith up on the moon to test the Galileo's theory that two objects in a vacuum would fall at the same rate. I did that with some old friends from Pixar, Simon Dunstan and BJ Christensen, and we just did it on the side, like kind of garage style. Because all the dialogue comes from the actual recording from NASA. But we wanted to do like a series of those. We thought it'd be fun to kind of revisit Apollo with our depiction of the astronauts and do the use the real recordings.
Mm-hmm.
So Aerial Contrivance Workshop is my little studio. And basically, it's the idea is jobs come in and then I look out for artists to join and
Right.
help me help us make them. We did this Roatan initiative. Roatan's an island in the Caribbean, and some doctors I know who have a clinic there, they reached out to us to create videos to teach breastfeeding to
Oh yeah, that was
the
another one.
designed by Caroline Rainmakers, who's a Dutch artist, and or Belgium, and she designed it and actually kicked it off for us. And then she couldn't keep going, so we brought on Leo, who finished it out, animated it. And so that's a short he did. Plato's a short he made, so we posted it on our website as an example of his work that he does. So yes, and he's a great artist. I love working with Leo, and he's doing more stuff in France. And so the way the studio kind of works is I bring artists in, and if they're available, we work together, and they are free to then do whatever they do, so that we're just having people float in and out. So I'm sort of building a giant Rolodex of artists who we like working with, who we work really well with, who fit our sensibilities. And because we're kind of trying to be open to different forms of animation and different way people work, and so we're just sort of open to whoever's out there who's just talented. And I think in this field right now, I mean, there's so much demand for artists, it's kind of hard to either you're going to lock them in under contract under one roof or something, or you have to be kind of free form, and that's kind of the way we have to operate because
Right.
I don't really have a huge overhead that I can pay for. So just trying to bring in talent who we all like to work together. So it's just, and the way technology is today, we can kind of, tap into these talents all over the world. So, so far it's been pretty good. I mean, the Philharmonia piece we did with my production designer was Louis Thomas, who is in Paris, and he's a great children's book artist and worked at Pixar briefly on Coco and stuff. But he works out of Paris. And then we also brought on our main animator, graphics animator, was this guy Chris Anderson, who's in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We had another animator in Georgia, Tati Monitz. She was fantastic, like just character animator. Then we had Hana Abihana, who's our lead animator, and he's the main animator for the Cupheads computer game. And we worked together on Mary Poppins as well. And he's been doing some animation test stuff for us for the Inventor. So Hana kind of supervising. He's in Oakland. Then we had a couple animators from LA.
Wow.
So we had, for that project, we had people all over. And, and that's, I don't know, Mary Poppins too was the way that it's funny. The original Mary Poppins was all done in Burbank,
right,
at the studio, right? And they kind of had that as a strength of the film, in the sense of, like, you had all this talent, who you still had the 9 old guys and everyone else who had grown up with the studio, and they're at the height of their talents making this. We needed to cobble together a group of animators who could do that level of animation from all over the world, basically, whoever was available. You had films like Klaus starting up, and other things were starting to gobble up 2D animators.
right.
So of that caliber. So there's like 2D animators who can do TV stuff and other styles, and like even cartoon saloon type animation. And then there's like a certain style of animation that is that full Disney kind of style, and not every animator is trained to do that. Not that they couldn't eventually get there or even available to do it.
Right.
There were many animators we looked for who were really talented animators who are now storyboarding or doing CG animation because they needed to make a living when Disney closed up shop. So we had to find these animators. So we ended up working with animators mainly at Duncan Studios, at Ken Duncan Studios in Pasadena. We brought in a bunch, and some people came from other places to work at the studio. It's possible today to do that. And so, the world has changed.
The world has changed.
One building animation. We used the mixture, kind of like Hairlove did, of the puppet tool and hand animation.
Yeah.
Straight hand animation on the Philharmonia Fantastique animation of the sprite character that we follow through the story. I would encourage you out there who are CG animators to also pick up a pencil and try to draw a little bit.
And sometimes that's so easy to do, to try to get your thoughts across to someone. If you can know how to draw it on paper, boom, you don't have to sit there, hold on, wait, let me make a model and let me rig it and
right.
Let me put some textures on it here. And now, this is what, remember that conversation we had 6 months ago? Okay, well, this is what I'm trying to show you.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So, anyway.
There is such an immediacy to picking up that pad of paper. Often the stuff I do today, I still, again, it might be because of where I started, but I find it easier for me to pick up that pad of paper and draw out my storyboards and on paper and thumbnail that way and develop it that way. It's just quicker. And then I just shoot everything with my phone.
Right. And
bring it into my computer. And then I can touch it up in Photoshop or something, or draw over it or do whatever I need to do. Right. Or, the Leonardo project with the Inventor, I did a lot of storyboarding while I was on Mary Poppins, even, because there'd be times when we were in production where I'd be waiting for animation work and stuff to come in, and I would be like, whoa, I actually have nothing to do right now until we have the next meeting. I'm going to work on some storyboards for my Leonardo project. And so I would pull out I got these little moleskin pads that were horizontal, and I would just draw in those and do all my storyboards in that, then photograph it with my camera and just bring it in, and sent all those as we're starting to develop the story reel, I just sent those to the editor to cut together.
Do you have a website we can look at more stuff?
Well, anybody could go to aerialcontrivance.com and check out our page there. We have a bunch of stuff, projects and stuff. There is a Facebook page also for Aerial Contrivance, and also a Facebook page for the Inventor. You can follow what the company's doing. So that would list at Aerial Contrivance like the Philharmonia project and other projects we're doing, and then the inventor will be specifically about the development of the feature film, The Inventor.
I want to thank Jim Capobianco for being on Animateducated and telling us all about what you've been doing and what you're working on.
Jim Richardson, you are
Yeah.
very much welcome. Anytime if you want to chat again.
Yeah,
ring.
definitely.